Because I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, this isn't what happened. Like, oh, you have a video? Yeah, you want to see it? Sure. I played it for him, and I just remember the look on the captain's face. I was so happy to be doing this job and so thrilled to be there every single day that it was just so far off of my radar.
Hey IA fam, this is the IA guy here with the Internal Affairs Hey Police podcast. Today's guest is an active police lieutenant who works for an agency in Southern California. And I got to tell you, the story that you're going to hear is where Chris Hendrix was terminated because of an off-duty incident. And it just so happens about almost 2 years later, he gets his job back. And the story and the journey tells a lot about his character, his perseverance, and so much more. I can't wait to get into this, and just stand by. It's going to be a good one. Welcome back to Internal Affairs Hey Police podcast here with the IA guy and Chris Hendrix. Thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
This type of story is going to be one that certainly it's going to impact, I would hope, not just so much a lot of the experience that I've had when it comes to these kind of complex cases. And I know it's an off-duty incident, and we'll get into it. But more important than anything, I just found out you're a Capricorn, just like me. So I just want to make sure that we understand that Capricorns rule. It's a really good zodiac sign. But look, thank you for being here. And rather than doing the scaling from 1 to 10, what I want to get into in the first segment is I wanted to ask you, you came on the job in 2007 full-time, and what was your impression of internal affairs at that time, or what were you told about IA?
You know, I think my belief of it at the time, and the small window that you get it in the academy or what you've heard, is I figured internal affairs was somebody I would never talk to. If I was supposed to talk to them at all, just always tell them the truth. And I just never imagined it would be anything in my career I would ever have to deal with, because I never would do anything that would warrant me having to go there. And so that's just kind of my belief at the time. My young, impressionable, I was so excited about getting into the job that I'm like, I don't break the law, I don't break the rules, and I'm not that person that would ever be involved in that. So I guess my belief, or the stigma that goes along with it, is you just kind of think as a brand new academy graduate going into it, is cops who go to IA, there's something wrong with them. They must be up to no good, right? And so that's kind of like how I went into it. I just, figured out that's just an avenue that I'll never have to deal with, because I don't do some of those things or whatever it is you think. I always thought at the time, like, oh, they must be really in a lot of trouble, using excessive force and violent and all these problems. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into and how involved some of those things can be. And
curious to know now, as you sit here today, as you reflect on internal affairs, did any of your FTOs, or did you hear anyone from the department, colleagues, co-workers, tell you anything about IA? And the point I'm trying to get to is, you and I both can agree there's a stigma that comes along with IA. And that stigma is very negative. We're called all these nicknames, the Rat Squad, the Dark Side, et cetera, et cetera. I suppose, what is it that you think where that came from, or how does that happen, if any? I think like any other job in the police department or in the private sector or ever, I think that when you have the wrong people put in the positions to handle certain responsibilities, that's going to create the rumor, or it's going to create some bad interactions that occur. So I would imagine that stigma comes from prior horrible interactions or experiences. And for a small department like ours, it's nearly impossible to get away from the idea that, I currently serve as the internal affairs lieutenant for my agency. There's not one person in my department that I don't know personally. Yeah. I mean, today I could go into work and find out that there's an allegation of misconduct that we have to take a look at, and there's no way that it's going to be easy. I'm going to have to
I'm going to be looking at somebody who I've probably been to their house. I probably know their kids' names. My wife's probably friends with their wife or their husband or whatever the case may be. And so I think to answer your question, I would imagine that stigma comes from, as I referred to it in the military, the Lance Corporal Underground, right? The stories that go along with it. And I think that those stories get generated because we're so private and because, well, we can't share anything, we can't talk about it, we're not open to discuss it. So then the stories get made on their own. I mean, I remember being in training with my agency, and I heard about 4 or 5 people that I don't know that had since either been fired or been in trouble or did stuff that they weren't supposed to do. And of course, the stories from back then were stories from the 90s, right? It was, oh yeah, they were having an affair with somebody while on duty at this other place. I mean, I'll leave the details that I heard because I don't even know if they're that accurate, but it's like, you're like, oh man, you should probably be in trouble for that. Like, who would ever do that? Or, getting arrested or all these other things. And so they just seemed so far out of the norm that it was, shop talk and, go back to work. I'm never going to experience that. It's the small, it wasn't until later on that I started to realize, I did my current chief, great guy, was one of my FTOs. And I remember we did a little experiment one day. We tried to work an entire shift without violating an department policy. It's nearly impossible. It's definitely impossible to do your job. I mean, you're not even allowed to look at the screen while you're in your car, but that's how we get dispatch calls.
Right.
You're only supposed to talk on your, PCD, your personal communication device, once every hour. Yeah. My phone goes off every 10 minutes, right? So it's like they're there, and they're guidelines to an extent. Obviously, there's some that are shalls, some that are shoulds.
Correct.
I don't know if trying to stay on topic here with you, but I believe that from my perspective and all that I've been through, I try to guide things in a way to look at it from, are people making the best decisions that they could have made with the information they had at the time that they made it?
Very good. You bring up a good point about the expectations, I suppose, of a police officer or someone who's in law enforcement today, or just, I normally say it's a little overwhelming. It's a lot. And yes, you remind me when you say about these policies, hey, I'm not supposed to look at the screen, and yet, it says, I get texts and phone calls all the time. It's almost as if there's deviation all the time.
Right.
And what goes along with use of force, it made me think about that. But going back to the stigma, one of my guests was kind of spot on, where he says, it's how we treat each other. I think the treatment of one another means a lot, and goes back to certainly 25 years ago. I was probably told that they were evil.
Right.
They're just bad people. They're out to get you.
Right.
And so what happens is generation after generation, it's almost as if it's a culture.
Right.
Which is one of several reasons why I decided to provide this platform, so that way, we can get some clarity, and we can educate whoever is watching and listening to know that internal affairs is really not what you think it is. Let me ask you this, Chris. What would you want? Let me ask you it this way. If there's one thing that you would want internal affairs investigators to know, what would that be?
God, that's a hard one. I think number one, first and foremost, is it's easy to fall into filling in the blanks of what the expectation, you might believe the expectation will be. So I think if I were to tell anybody who's looking to get into this position or is about to step in there, is it sounds kind of cliche. Oh, you're just a fact finder, but realistically, you almost become a life coach, right? You almost become somebody who has to sit there and empathize, and it's easy to detach yourself and go, well, it's not my house, it's not my family, it's not me that's not eating at night because I'm so nervous about what's going to happen. And there's some cases where I think are pretty cut and dry. I've heard stories, get into domestic violence, you assault somebody, you run from the police, you get in a pursuit, you're probably going to be out of a job and going to jail, right? I don't think that there's a lot of question in that. But when you're talking about some of these, allegations, it's stressful. It's difficult. You can't sleep well at night. So again, to try to answer your question, I think that the number one word that comes to mind is empathy. And if I was, maybe later on in my career, if I'm in the position where I'm going to start selecting people to work in these capacities, I want somebody who's been through those things. I want somebody who has the capacity to understand how stressful this stuff can be. So much so that I would say that, and it's a little somewhat off topic, but relevant. I think for the last 2 decades, we've done ourselves a disservice in law enforcement because that's who we hire. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we're hiring poor candidates, but the pool that we've limited ourselves to is, well, they've got to have great credit, and I don't want them to be in any trouble, and they can't have any speeding tickets, and they can't have a criminal record. Well, who's that? It's the 24-year-old living at home with mom and dad who's never had any adversity. And then we're going to put a badge and a gun on them, and we're going to stick them out in the street, and we're going to tell them to deal with societal problems and make decisions that they've never even experienced themselves before. And it puts them on, it's not fair to them. Yeah. It's certainly not fair to their communities. And it's no wonder why we see these types of issues that start to pop up, because they've never experienced any of that stuff. To me, it's like when I look at a background, I'm like, well, this guy's been IA'd 3 times. Great, let's look into it. Maybe there's a good reason for that. Maybe he was, he or she, didn't do anything wrong. Maybe they, were they doing good police work and somebody made a complaint? I mean, I want somebody who's had some life experience that, but so many times what I see, and I can't speak for my agency, we're very small and we hire laterals only and we don't get a huge pool. So it's not like I can't spend the time to read all this stuff. But I would imagine, I tried to get hired by a very large agency in Southern California. I wanted to work where my dad worked. And I got DQ'd for drug use, which is very interesting because I've never used drugs, ever. My mother died of a drug overdose. Yeah. I won't touch any of that stuff, with the exception of a prescription when it's prescribed to me for limited use, and most of the time I won't finish those. That's not me. Yeah. So I was scratching my head. I'm like, how did I get DQ'd for drug use? I later find out that it was I got put in the wrong pile. And so, I don't know. I can't speak for that agency. I've never been there. But I just imagine, you might know. You worked in a big, I just imagine, 20 employees and thousands of paper applications, and you're just putting them, this is the DQ pile, this is this pile. So I can see how those things could get shuffled.
Oh, 100%. The assembly line,
right.
Will continue, and sometimes you'll find a defect,
right,
and sometimes you won't, and,
right,
and then you pay the price.
Right.
In your case, you didn't get hired for that agency.
Yeah.
But I will say this is you bring us some really good pointers in terms that accountability goes so far. And what I've realized and I've learned, not just from this podcast, from my career, is it's kind of difficult to really have some self-accountability, especially when you're facing an IA. There's not much room to inform, your family or even your coworkers,
right?
Or and I'm sure you've experienced this. They'll just blame it on the department. Oh, the department was out to get me, and they'll become disgruntled.
Right.
And so I agree. I would want in a character or a trait of an IA investigator is someone who's actually gone through this system from beginning to end, because that person's going to know, to your point of empathy. And more so than anything, it's the treatment. Again, and I say this a lot. One of my guests, perfect line, and I'm certainly going to make a T-shirt out of it. Is it's the punishment's not the penalty. The punishment is the process.
100%.
And that is so important, which I'm certain it doesn't get talked about in any police podcast that I know. Which is another motivating factor to do this. So I appreciate you sharing all that.
Well, I hold the record at my agency for a 4-month unpaid suspension.
Yeah, you know what?
And I would take that today again to avoid having to go through that process.
Absolutely. Right? And had you would have been told.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes me a good point, because had you would have been told, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, the treatment probably would have been different. Would not have been different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's funny when we get into this story and you start to hear some of these things. It's like, here's the thing: the chief that was in charge at the time when this thing happened, I'm friends with him. I talked to him not too long ago, I don't hold him accountable. When you get to the level of the chief of police, what's happening is you're being fed information. You're not doing the IA. You're not doing the fact finding. You're not interviewing people. You're not making any of these recommendations. You're getting briefed, and what you're getting briefed, you have to make those decisions on. Yeah. And it's you know, and again, I take full ownership for my part on it. He
100%.
never would have been in the position to make those decisions had I not made some poor decisions myself.
No,
right?
absolutely.
So, but I think, you know, the question that you asked about that one thing, I think that the flip side of that is, what are the things that we don't want? Well, I don't want somebody to be an eye investigator who's looking at using it as a stepstone to get promoted. I don't want somebody who wants to step into an internal affairs position who doesn't have a history or the backbone to stand up and give negative feedback to their superiors, right? I think part of being a strong leader is being able to protect those that are responsible for you too, right? Sometimes you have to have the courage to go into your boss's office and say, I think this is a bad idea. And that conversation is to be had in the boss's office, right? And when they make the decision, then we'll open the door and then that discussion's over. Yeah. But if you don't even have the courage to go in there, if it's just like, you know what, my boss comes in and tells me the sky's purple today, and I go, yeah, you know what, boss, it looks very purple. Yeah. Great observation. No. I'm sorry.
100%.
And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more of that, in my opinion, in our career field because it's easy.
100%. And in addition to that is, hey, I get a flex work schedule and I'm off every weekend and I work 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. Hey, 3:58, I'm out the door.
Right.
And you just do the bare minimum.
Right.
I appreciate all that. Look, trip down memory lane. Here's one of my favorite. We already established that you came on the job in December 2007. Then you were a corporal for 6 months. Then you became a detective in December of 2013. You became a sergeant in December of 2016.
I think they were reversed. It was detective, then I was a corporal.
There you go.
But
something like that. December is...
It keeps showing up.
It's the go-to month is what it is. And lo and behold, congratulations, you made lieutenant December of last year, of 2023. I got to ask you, what was the academy like?
It was December of 22, actually. I gave you the wrong date.
Okay.
The academy was exhausting for me. And I was full-time in the Marines. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I got accepted to a part-time academy, Palomar. Great program. I had great leaders, great training officers. I haven't asked for their permission, so I'll leave their names out of it, but some of them are still on the job. And I hold them in very high esteem. I learned a lot. Got a lot of great experiences out of that. I didn't have a life for a year because, I'd go to work at 4 a.m. That's the only way my boss in the military would let me leave early to go to the academy is if I came in and did all the training in the morning. So I would come in and run. I do as part of the training cadre on Camp Pendleton, and so I would come in and run all the lack of a better term, the pork chop platoon.
Right. The course.
Right. So run down to the pool, do a swim, run back, get changed up, then do my job. Then at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I would stop that, change into a uniform from being a sergeant in the Marines to now being a recruit in the academy, drive to the academy, and stay there till 10:30 at night. And my now ex-wife, fantastic lady. We were the typical 20 years old when we get married. We know everything there is to know about life. But I wouldn't have made it without her. I mean, she handled everything there, and she was working too. She supported me through that, and so it was a good time. I ended up, I graduated with the Top Cop Award and an Esprit de Corps Award, which I had no idea that was a thing. But I never really put much weight into any of those. They're kind of I think who really remembers that stuff. But to me, the Esprit de Corps Award was super important because I found out that the Top Cop Award is voted on by TAC staff. Okay. The Esprit de Corps Award is voted on by my peers, and I took that to heart. I was actually pretty humbled by that. Like, and I don't know specifically, why. I just know that after my time in the military, we had a lot of young kids there that didn't have a lot of life experience. I used to bring all my stuff into my trunk, like the extra buttons and the extra pins and the extra shirt stays and the extra ties because somebody always forgets something. So, hey, I got one for you. Let me hook you up. I think part of being in the Marines, you know that you've got a platoon, so we've got people to take care of. helped me through that. So that was kind of my experience, going through it. I was lucky enough to get selected by Seal Beach as a reserve while I was still in the academy, and that's kind of where it took me.
Nice. Corporal, you were there for 6 months. I know we talked about that before we started the episode. What happened those 6 months, or you became a corporal?
So in our agency, detectives isn't necessarily a promotion; it's a special assignment. We rotate every 5 years.
Okay.
There's some give here and there on that, but so I was working as a detective. We had a testing come up. We have corporals and sergeants, and you don't necessarily have to be a corporal to be a sergeant, but it's definitely a help because you get to be the watch commander from time to time, and you take on some of those formal leadership roles in the absence of our sergeants. So I tested, got selected, and was lucky enough to get promoted, which was kind of bittersweet. I was working in a detective bureau that was ran by who would later become one of the best leaders I've ever worked for. His name was Joe Miller. He was my detective sergeant at the time, and it was one of the best times of my career. I mean, we were
Nice.
GPS trackers and warrants and surveillances, and it was just a blast. And he was such a good guy. Outworked all of us. I learned a lot more about my work ethic from that man. So that was that's how it happened. So I took the promotion to corporal. I almost didn't take it, but he said, keep going.
You got to do it.
If you want to come back, go get sergeant. Come back here and run this team.
Yeah, and
I said,
then
okay.
you, congratulations, you made sergeant in December. I got the years messed up, but December seems to be your tune, man.
Yeah. You get
It's a good gift.
You get in trouble in December. I was born in December. I get promoted
That's right,
in
in
December.
December.
Good things happen to me, and bad things apparently.
You made sergeant. What kind of assignments did you have as a sergeant?
I'm sorry?
What kind of assignments did you have as a sergeant? Besides patrol?
Yeah, so I was a patrol watch commander. I don't know. I think as the new sergeant, they throw everything. Now you're in charge of the drone team, and you're going to get honor guard and everything else that none of the other sergeants wanted anymore. Nothing that was too crazy. And then from there, the next step for me was we had a sergeant retiring out of the detective bureau, and I wanted to go back. So after a couple of years working as a patrol watch commander, I put in for that and was lucky enough to get selected, and that's really where things took off.
Yeah, detective sergeant, and then I do know that you made lieutenant. That's your current rank, and yeah, man. You know what? The pension counts. So,
Right.
You keep moving up, your pension percentage will increase, and you'll be a happy man when you retire.
I'm still not convinced.
You will be. You will be one
If it
day.
wasn't for my wife won't let me go back to doing real police work, as I say. But
Yeah.
I'm trying to embrace it. It's a new position. It's different than I've been in operations my whole career.
Right.
I've always been on the operations side, so it's my first time on this side of it. So there's a lot to learn, and it is eye opening. There's a lot of there's some fun things that we get to do. Yesterday was a good day for me. I got to give some guys on our SWAT team some new toys to test out.
Oh,
I wanted
that's
to go play
awesome.
with that. That was fun. And then I got to give our detectives some new GPS trackers to go test out. So I don't know if my chief will ever hear this, but I did encourage them to track up the chief's car without his knowledge to see what happens. See how that goes.
You never know, there might be an IA out of it. Who knows? So what we'll do now, of course, is the segment of your IA story. Look, we talked about this. You reached out to me. I'd really appreciate you coming down to share this, because this is going to have a tone that it's dear to me, because I'll be the first one to tell you from my experience with internal affairs, anything that happens off duty, the scope is very, very narrow, as opposed to things or situations that happen on duty.
Right.
I can tell you from experience that anything that happens on duty, for the most part, the department's pretty lenient and pretty flexible. But when it comes to off-duty incidents, the scope gets a little more narrow, and we start really honing in on your behavior and conduct. So I do know that in December of 2009, right, here we go, another gift, in the holiday season, you were involved in an off-duty incident with a family member, and along with that was a taser deployment.
Yeah.
And so, you know what, I'll leave the floor up to you. Just kind of walk us through what happened, and we'll go from there, brother.
Okay. I think how many times I've told the story over the years, right? So at the time, my wife and I, were living in a condo we had just bought, and my ex-wife, she worked in our jail, My brother-in-law, her little brother, was staying with us. He was supposed to be going into the Navy. I'm not sure exactly what all went down later, but I was on the SWAT team, so I had a lot of gear at home, and he had raised a question to me on multiple occasions. He was very interested in the taser. He'd watched people getting tased on cops or on TV and this, that, and the other, and he just couldn't comprehend. He was a pretty big strapping kid. Couldn't wrap his head around the fact that how can this little device take over these big, strong men that he's seeing getting tased, and they can't even move. He just didn't think that it was possible. He really wanted to try it, which, I think most people would agree, giving an opportunity to tase your brother-in-law sounds like a hoot. I mean, who wouldn't want to, take an opportunity at that? Of course, my response at the time was absolutely not. I was pretty focused on my job, and I was very excited to be doing what I was doing. Fast forward a couple weeks, I was at an Explorer Academy where I was an instructor there, teaching drill, and talking to some of the other officers there, I found out, and obviously leave them out of it, but I had heard some stories that there's some agencies that were, tasing their explorers for training. I got tased. I took the full 5-second ride when I was in the academy, so I recognized it to be safe. And so I started thinking, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm being a little harsh with, my brother-in-law who's young and impressionable, and want to maintain a good relationship. I want to have fun with the kid, but so I thought about it, and I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. So I went to work. Next time I was at work, I asked my boss. I was in briefing. Briefing got done. Sarge, can I chat with you for a minute? Sure. This is the scenario. This person. He's been on a ride-along. What do you think about me tasing the crap out of him? No. What do you think about, this whole taser thing? And the response I got was pretty nonchalant. I was like, off duty? Yeah. I was like, I don't care. That's fine. Okay. Sounds good. So went home, talked to him. So you want to do it or what? And he was like, absolutely. I'm like, you're sure? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay. So we set it up, and of course took some safety procedures in place. I was a little concerned. I didn't want him. He's a big kid. I didn't want him knocking over my TV or squishing my dog or getting hurt.
Of course. No, totally.
So we went to the spare bedroom that I had. There was a bed in there, and kneeled down on the bed, and my wife was on one side, my ex-wife was on one side, my mother-in-law was on the other side, and I gave him darts in the back, and he took the full 5-second ride, and that was it. We recorded it, which, nowadays you'd be like, why would you ever record that? It actually helped to serve me, but wouldn't let him have a copy of it. I didn't trust this young man to not send it to everybody he knew.
Of course.
I was smart enough to recognize that it probably shouldn't be something that we would wildly display. Also, as a new police officer, I don't want people I don't know seeing the inside of my house and the people that I care for. So I didn't want it on the internet, but I had it. He could watch it all he wanted, and we laughed, and it was done and over with. It was probably 4 or 5 days later. My ex-wife was at work and mentioned it to somebody in our jail, one of her coworkers. I don't know exactly what transpired after that, other than the story that got told from that person to the watch commander at some point in time was that, did you know that Hendrix tased his brother-in-law? Oh, really? Yeah. And this other sergeant knew about it, and I guess it was at a party, and everybody was drinking, and there was some domestic violence issue, and his brother-in-law's this juvie. It spins this whole story, which I don't know how it got there. I've never talked to that person before or after that, but either way, that's the rumor that gets started. So within a short period of time, I would say within a day or two, I'm working patrol, and in fact, I'll never forget the day. I'm in the report writing room. I've never had a problem turning in reports on time. No watch commander has ever asked me, hey, how many reports are you holding? But that day, a watch commander did ask me about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hey, how many reports you got? They go, I'm down like 2, which, wasn't nothing. And I heard a neighboring city in a foot pursuit, and the description that came out was a guy I was looking for from a crime earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. So I start heading out the doors as I'm going to go up there and do the Lord's work. And figure we can close 2 cases at once. And I get stopped from the watch commander and say, hey, where are you going? Foot pursuit. That guy I think's related to our crime. was going to go up there and see if we can't help out and see if I can close this out. I need you to, the captain wants to see you. Right now? Like, the captain's going to be here for 3 more hours. Like, in my mind at that time, my world revolved around that radio and handling police work. Was so oblivious to any of the other things going on. Now you talk to guys like you and I that have been doing this long. I was like, what's the captain want to talk to me about? Right?
And call the captain's office.
Right. Anyways, I go in there and I was, I remember walking into the captain's office. Sir, I heard you want to see me. And by that time, the lieutenant also comes walking in. And he's like, yeah, we're going to be in the conference room. I go, that doesn't sound good. And I was joking. And the response I got was, yeah, it's not. Oh, okay. So I go in and sit down, and they slide me this notice, and I'd never seen one before. I mean, I didn't even know what POBAR was. Like, I'm sure that it was told to me at some point. It was just, I couldn't even tell you what I was making. Right. I didn't even know what my paycheck was. I was so happy to be doing this job and so thrilled to be there every single day that it was just so far off of my radar. So I quickly start seeing things like, conduct unbecoming or unlawful use of a taser or whatever I can't remember the exact policy violations, but there's a lot of them, and they're asking for my badge and my gun, and they're putting me on leave, and I'm starting to get choked up. I'm like, I've never been in trouble. I started working when I was 14. My mom wasn't the best influence in my life. I had to do a lot on my own. I was pushing grocery carts at 15. I was refereeing YMCA games. I was working at a pizza parlor. Got a job at a lumber company. It's like I was a police explorer. As dorky as some people may think that sounds, it was the only thing that kept me out of trouble. Was going into the police department and having great mentors that helped me get to where I was. So for me to be at the pinnacle of what I had worked so hard to achieve, I wasn't drinking underage. I wasn't in trouble. I made these decisions throughout my life to put me in this position, and then here we are. I'm getting served. And so, obviously, as I'm reading it, I know what they're talking about, so I start volunteering information. Probably not the best thing to do, but in my eyes, I still hadn't done anything wrong. It's like I remember saying, I asked the sergeant. He said it was fine. Like, what's the problem?
Right.
And the response I kept getting, we'll just let the cards fall where they may. It'll be fine. We'll get to that. We'll just let the cards fall where they may. It's like nobody was hearing anything that I was saying. And I don't fault the people in the room at that time. And they were, given direction, or they came to a conclusion. This is what we got to do. We're going to have to fact find, and if that turns out to be true, then we'll deal with that when that comes. I know those things now, but at the time I didn't understand it. So wanted to go back to the house and retrieve my taser cartridge. I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess. You're the second and third in charge of my department. I'm not going to tell you no, right? So follow me, sir. Open my garage right this way. And they collect a taser cartridge out of my trash, and I made a comment to them. I was like, there's a video of this whole thing. Because I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, this isn't what happened. Like, this is not even close to what happened. Yeah. Oh, you have a video? Yeah, you want to see it? Sure. I played it for him, and I just remember the look on the captain's face was, this is not the story we were told. And I could tell. He was like, yeah, I really want a copy of that. I could tell that he, clearly whatever they had been told was not what they were watching on this video. Thankfully, I had a copy.
He was caught by surprise.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, he basically said, look, just stay calm. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Do your thing. And that was it. So I left at home alone in my brand new condo that I couldn't afford if I didn't have this job. And they leave. And, I was told I couldn't talk to my wife because she was going to be brought on this IA. And, so those types of things that were happening started to be little warning signs for me. Mm-hmm. I was like, what do you mean I can't talk to my wife? I didn't say that to anybody, but I'm sitting at home and I'm starting to digest this information as it's coming in. It's like something just doesn't seem right here. Something's not right. So anyways, I'm trying to, there's so many details.
No, that's fine. If I may interject, at some point you're relieved from duty, you're at home with no pay. Mm-hmm. I take it that process took...
with pay.
Okay.
In their defense, I was getting paid.
Okay, you were getting paid, but at some point there was a determination to be made.
There was. So there's a couple other things that went on in this that are kind of interesting. So I had recommended we hire another person when I was in good standing. A very good friend of mine had been my supervisor in the Marines, was one of the best cops I ever knew. In fact, when I was asked about hiring him from the chief, do you have any reservations about hiring this guy that you've recommended? And I said, yeah, I do have one. What's that? He's going to do better at this job than I am. That's how I felt about him. He was that good. He was great. And we hired him. Well, he, at the time, 2007, 2008, housing crisis, property values are in the toilet, everybody's broke. He couldn't sell his house. He would take a bath in it. So his house in Temecula, right, we're working in Seal Beach. That's an hour and 40-minute drive. So I had offered to him, I got a 3-bedroom house, just my wife and I. If you want to stay here on your working nights, we're both brand new, crash at my house so you can go to work, and then on your weekend off, you can go home. So it was surmised, I don't know how that it arose to this so quickly, but it was surmised that he knew about it also and didn't tell anybody. So they start eyeing him. They also started eyeing my wife. So to fast forward, the first nail in the coffin was they extended his probation. He had a baby on the way, had a brand new house, and the day before he was supposed to get off probation, they let him go.
Wow.
For failure to meet probationary standards, and he had outstanding across the board. I'll never forget laying in bed, getting woken up early because he was going in for day shift briefing and getting the call. He was in tears. The man was in tears.
Yeah.
I got a baby on the way. We just sold this house. I just bought this house, and I'm told I failed to meet probationary standards, whatever the hell that means.
Right.
And he had done good work. That one hurt. That's when it all kind of came together for me. I had been fighting this fight. I'd been, trying to make ends meet because we're not getting any overtime, and we were making it, and I was confident that I hadn't done anything that would result in me losing my career. Sure, I've made some mistakes. I'll own those things, but that was the first nail in the coffin. And of course, it quickly fell after that. My wife was shortly fired after that. It was interesting because somebody must have given the department some direction that you can't fire her for not telling on her husband, because she was actually allowed to go back to work, which is funny. We talked about December of 2009 or December when I got put off. I actually went back to work. I showed them the video. They brought me back 3 weeks later.
Okay.
And I worked Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, I worked all the holidays, and then shortly there in January, they put me back off again. So we must have been shorthanded and needed somebody to work the holidays.
It sounds a little self-serving, like, hey, we need them.
I'm not complaining because I got some good overtime out of it and I needed the money.
Right.
But I will tell you, it's interesting because when I went back, I was so excited. I was elated. I was like, oh, it's over. And I asked the boss, I was like, are we good? And he's like, can't give you any information right now. We're still investigating. But I can tell you in my experience, coming back to work's a good sign. Okay, so I was head down, yes sir, no sir, handle my beat. I didn't want any trouble. I was going out of my way, and I'll just never forget going in that January, the lieutenant that called me walks by. I'll never forget him, and I'll leave his name out of it, but he walks by and he's like, hey Chris, how you doing? Good, sir. Thanks for asking. I'm just happy to be here. So glad to be back, and none of these issues will ever happen again, and just happy to be here. That's great. Glad to hear it. Can we talk for a minute? Sure, sir. Walks me back to his office, sits me down with a smile on his face. We're putting you back on leave again. Is there anything you want to tell me?
Wow.
And that was the moment in time, that December date for me, the second time I got put on leave, I was like, he's happy about it. Like, I learned something from that, is I will never treat my people that way. I will never, ever even I won't even treat that person that way. That person's long retired. They're gone, right?
Right.
But even if I saw that person here today, I would never treat that person that way, even though I feel like that was disrespectful, that was hurtful, that was vindictive, that was not appropriate. I would never treat somebody that way. And again, I didn't come here to grind any axes because, it was a different time and there were different motivations and things going on. But
and if I may interject, I don't think it's a axe grinding type of response.
Right.
I honestly think it has a lot to do with how you're treated.
Right.
And those are one of many lessons learned from this. I got to ask you, from that second time when this happened and he put you off and you were on admin leave, how long were you on admin leave until the decision came down? If you can recall. Was it 6 months, a year?
It was over a year.
So you were at home for about a year, over a year.
Right.
And you were getting paid. Is that correct?
I was.
Okay. And then at some point you got skellied.
I did.
Okay. And when you got skellied, we're probably, what, a year and a half now?
Yeah, well, it's because I got in trouble again.
That's right. We talked about that, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they decided to label it as a reckless driving when in reality it was a speeding ticket.
Right. And, in their defense, I did get a reckless driving ticket. In all honesty, I did.
Okay.
I was speeding in a Dodge Challenger. I shouldn't have been. But, when you fire my wife, I can't afford my mortgage, and I'm not making any overtime. I was hustling moving jobs on Craigslist. I was getting paid a couple $100 to help somebody move their stuff. So I was moving from one spot to the other, and I was just trying to get home. So not an excuse.
No.
I was breaking the law.
Well,
I certainly didn't deserve getting a reckless driving ticket, but
Right.
I will say the CHP officer who wrote me that ticket, who was very upset and pointed his gun at me, it was 4 or 5 days after a couple of chippies had gotten run over on they were on a traffic stop, and they had gotten killed or seriously injured. I think they got killed, and they were on the shoulder, and somebody was impatient in traffic and drove down the shoulder and hit two of their officers. Okay. Don't quote me on the exact circumstances, but I learned a valuable lesson that day. As soon as when a couple of chippies get killed, tragically, that's horrible news. You're probably not going to make any good friends with them if you're now speeding as well. So anyways, I got this reckless driving ticket. Of course, now I'm panicked because I'm supposed to be on administrative leave. And I'll never forget because our conversation wasn't very friendly. He picked up pretty quickly that I was a cop, but I wasn't telling him where I worked. I didn't have a badge. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have any of that stuff. And I didn't want anybody to know, to be quite honest.
Yeah,
I just wanted the whole thing to go away.
Right.
And his supervisor showed up. And so I told his supervisor, when he asked me, I told him what was going on. And of course, he's like, oh, I know, Sergeant so-and-so, who happened to be the IA sergeant. I'm like, of course you do. My luck couldn't get any worse, right? It's like, so anyways, I called my attorney. This is another, I think, lesson that we really got to take into consideration, because I've gotten some attorney's advice before. Yeah. And my attorney's advice was to not report it.
Okay.
Which goes against what I thought I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, of course, he's got whoever it is working for him that goes through our policy. And I talked to our POA president at the time, and he said, you don't need to report it. And the reason why is at the time we had two conflicting policies. We had one policy that said you have to report every contact no matter what. Mm-hmm. We had another policy that says you need to report any conviction that's going to impact your ability to perform your job. So if you get convicted of a crime that is going to suspend your driver's license, we need to know about it.
Absolutely.
DV, you can't carry a weapon, we need to know about it.
Yeah.
So because there was two conflicting policies at the time, they said, well, if we tell them, you're screwed. If we don't tell them and they don't find out, we might be able to be okay. Basically, the advice I was given at the time was, don't say anything. Let's see what turns out.
Yeah.
So
and what did turn out?
I was smart enough to know at the time. I knew enough about reckless driving is, I need 3 moving violations for that. It's a specific intent crime. It's not a general intent crime. Mm-hmm. I knew what I did. I was doing 90 miles an hour. There's not 3 moving violations there. So you can appear on or before your court date. So I was down at the
courthouse,
LA County Courthouse, within about 3 days, as soon as they had my docket number or whatever it was, and went in to appear. Said, I want to get this done now. They appointed me because it was a misdemeanor offense, a defense attorney or a public defender to talk to. I asked to see the report. He gave me the report. I went through the report, noted some issues with the report, not to say anything bad about, the officer, this, that, and the other thing. But I simply focused on the issues like, yes, I was speeding. I'll plead guilty to that. I have no problem with that. But this is not reckless driving.
Right.
It's funny how things work out. I never told a soul that I was a police officer. I didn't tell the public defender. I didn't tell the DA. I didn't even tell the bailiff. Nobody knew that I had any knowledge about policing. And I was very specific about that because I figured at some point somebody's going to find out about it. And what I could easily be fired for is trying to manipulate the court system to my favor. Right. And I certainly didn't want that to be the case, nor would I ever do that. If I messed up, I'll take ownership for I've always been that way. Right. Give me my lumps, I'll learn my lesson, let's move on. Mm-hmm. So public defender presents it to the DA, who's prosecuting the case or whatever, and the response I got back was, if you'll go sit through a DOI class and do 20 hours of community service, they'll just dismiss the whole thing. And I'm like, done. I walked out of the courtroom. I went and signed up for the community service. I left there, went to the Long Beach VA, walked in, did their class, and did all my community service in like 2 days. I was doing 10-hour days. Walked right back over there, was in the next class that they gave for which I thought was odd, the DUI stuff. I'm like, DUI? And I was in the courtroom in like 4 days. I was like, did all of it, dismissed, done. And I thought it was behind me. I was like,
yeah, hold the phone there because you weren't. So you're at a year and a half. Now we're looking at probably close to 2 years. And at some point, you were told that you were going to be terminated.
Yeah, so I got called in to come to the police department. And, at the time, I think the chief, and I don't want to speak on his behalf. I believe the chief was prepared to give me some pretty severe discipline.
Okay.
I don't think he was going to fire me.
Okay.
I've never asked him that point blank, but I think that's what his direction was going to be.
Okay.
So I come back thinking that I'm going to get slapped and let's just move on. And at that point, I would have taken 6 months off. I don't care. Like, let's just get over it. I get served with a new IA. Reckless driving, not reporting this ticket, all these other things. And I'm like, how did these guys find out, right? I didn't know in my young, minimal wisdom of how the criminal justice system worked that when the CHP report went in of a reckless driving misdemeanor citation, that goes to the DOJ. The DOJ has my prints and my name and information on file. And when they matched that up, a letter went to my department and said, one of your police officers got a misdemeanor citation for reckless driving. You would have hoped that my attorney would have known that, but, apparently not. So now it starts all over. I'm like, great, here we go again.
If we would have met back then, I would have told you.
What?
If we would have met back then, I would have told you.
Yeah. So, so I went back on leave and they investigated all that. They went to, they went to the courthouse and they talked to the DA and they talked to the public defender. And again, what really helped me is that nobody even knew that I was a cop. And those people were very honest and upfront. They didn't, and so were my IA investigator is a good friend of mine. He's retired, who was handling IA back there. Great guy. He went. That was the thing I will tell you about that guy, and that's a good example of a great internal affairs investigator. He had been my sergeant for a period of time. At the time, he was working on IA, and I just remember even, in the arbitration at some point, we're looking at each other because it became very clear that this was a fight between attorneys and had nothing to do with us. And we're almost laughing about this, what is happening? It's like we're so far beyond, the importance of this. So my point is that, I've heard stories from people of other instances where they're trying to convince DAs to file charges or to do certain things to further benefit whatever, that didn't happen to me. They went down there, they did their fact finding, they came back. They weren't happy about it, and I was to receive some discipline for it. I can't speak for the decisions that were made from the department at that point, but I get called back in, and now I'm to get
Skelly.
And I begged for my job, learned my mistakes, would not happen again. I sold the Challenger, if that helps. I'm getting divorced. I'm losing my house. I'm on my knees at this point. I've got nothing left. I recognize that maybe I wasn't making the best decisions, but I don't think that I've done something here that says that has affected my ability to perform well at this job. I think that I got an interesting offer. I did get offered, if I resign, they'll hire me as a reserve. Now, I'll caveat that with, I had already signed orders for the military. I was getting ready to go to Afghanistan. They knew I was going to be leaving.
Okay.
And I did that because I was trying to get enough income to be able to save my house, right? Of course, those orders got changed. It was going to be like Guantanamo Bay or something, which didn't sound like any fun. And I was going to take it. I trusted the chief. I felt that he really did, he gave me an opportunity to come here. I let him down. I think that, his thought was maybe this agency isn't for you. maybe your fit would be better at a busier department with more to do. You're just too bored, right? There's just not enough for you to stay busy. You would be much better served at a larger agency. And I could kind of understand that maybe that could be the case, right? So anyways, long story short was my attorney advised me not to do that. He goes, no, then you're at will. And then all they got to do is say you're no longer working here and you can't fight this case. Yeah. And so that was a hard decision for me because I felt like I was kind of telling the chief at the time, who I was loyal to, that, thanks for the offer, but no.
You were in your Skelly hearing. They recommended terminate. Well, did they recommend termination at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you went to arbitration.
Yes.
Binding arbitration.
Yep.
Okay, so here we are at the arbitration hearing.
Right.
Like you mentioned earlier, it's the battle of the attorneys.
It is.
Very self-serving, and you're like, hello,
right.
I'm trying to get my job back here.
Right.
Let me ask you this, Chris, in terms of the arbitration in it itself, what was the material fact or evidence that caused the arbitrator to overturn the decision of the chief?
I think there was one, there was a couple of things.
Okay.
In fact, I won't quote it, but I can kind of give you a summary of what his opinion or conclusion was. Before I get to that, there was one interesting. I knew that I was going to get my job back on the second day of arbitration. I knew I was going to get my job.
Did you get that sense?
More than a sense. The arbitrator stopped the hearing.
Okay.
He pulled both attorneys outside and the sergeant outside, and I could overhear what was going on.
Okay.
He said, "Why are we here? This appears to be an issue that could have been handled in the watch commander's office. This appears to me that there's a dispute as to whether or not this guy had permission, and the sergeant was just in here and said he gave him permission. Why are we here?" So I knew, hearing that somebody from the outside looking in was getting the full picture. I can't believe for the life of me that the chief and all these other people, I don't think they were getting the full picture. I think that they were getting versions that people wanted them to hear at the time. Regardless of that, I left. I went to, I can't remember, Fort Hunter Liggett. I was doing pre-deployment training. I was back in the military, going through a divorce, losing my house, all that great stuff. And and I remember getting a call from my attorney. He said, "How's it feel to be a cop again?" Couldn't believe it. Dropped to my knees. I couldn't believe it was all over. It'd been, a year and a half. I'd lost everything I'd ever worked for. You go through those things and you feel like a piece of, you feel like the guy that you heard stories about when you were in the academy that gets fired by IA, right? It's like, but I'm not that guy, So anyways, that's kind of how it came back. And it was bittersweet, because my wife had gotten fired. She got her job back. Then she quit. She left, went to Texas. My buddy, he never got his job back. In fact, we jokingly talk about it from time to time that I got him evicted from California because he ended up leaving the entire state. Now, I will say, doing great.
Good.
He went into the Fed, 3 lovely children, great, family. Got it. He would always say, "You should come to the Fed side. It's like gentlemen's law enforcement." And living in another state where it's not so expensive, and you get a couple acres of property and a private plane. It's like, wow, maybe I should do that. But no, just not for me. I like being on the street.
Well, this is the part where I get to chime in with certainly my experience, and
right.
That I can tell you a couple of things. What your arbitrator said about why are we here, unfortunately, it's not just you.
Right.
It happens a lot, more than it should.
Right.
More than we should take such punishment, not because of the allegations, but the punishment of that we do it to ourselves.
Right.
And I'm going to kind of just 50% disagree with you, because I don't necessarily think that it was your boss's getting piece of information. I'm almost willing to bet, and I'm assuming here, of course, that at some point I think it gets personal.
Okay.
And it seems as though, and granted, in a small machine or a small agency, like the one that you are with, it has a tendency to sometimes pick, do we like someone or do we not like someone?
Right.
And the unfortunate part about this culture in internal affairs is that sometimes we make those decisions based on whether we like, or we don't like. I'll give you a perfect example. There can be my beloved LAPD, and I have no shame saying this, is that there could be a command staff officer that will receive a certain punishment for these particular types of allegations, and yet the same police officer that has the same similar circumstances of these allegations will get a complete different punishment.
Right.
Which is led to believe that there is a double standard.
Right.
And let's not, we want to keep it real. We want to keep it transparent. And unfortunately, that happens everywhere, not just in California. I've talked to other potential guests and people who want to come on and say, hey, you know what? Look at me. I'm over here in the East Coast or in the Midwest. And it happens everywhere. And it's just unfortunate that you have to have experienced all this. Let me ask you this, because in terms of the allegations, I know you gave me the pretty much the lowdown of what happened. There's 6 allegations here, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but there is violation of department policy and procedure. For whatever reason, they say you neglected duty, and there's one of the misuse of department equipment. Right. I totally agree with that. I think the misuse is a good thing, meaning good thing meaning that you did it. Right. However, I can tell you from experience, having done, and my listeners and my watchers have heard that I was an advocate. I put on these border rights hearings for serious termination cases. This is not a termination case. Right. And I think we can all agree with that. I think you kind of alluded to the fact that it didn't seem as though that this shouldn't be a termination type of incident, yet it was a suspension, or you thought there was going to be some heavy type of days, which I believe you ended up with 4 months. Right. Yeah. 4 months of paid vacation, or is your union, just out of curiosity?
It was 4 months unpaid suspension.
Okay.
I think the way the arbitrator wrote it was, although the actions and decisions of the appellant were immature and showed stupidity, or something to that effect, he said a lack of immaturity and irresponsibility is to be expected of an officer with less than a year and a half on. And nothing in my professional conduct record demonstrated that I had the ability to not make adjustments or not make changes. In fact, to the contrary, he said that I had a stellar performance record within the agency. And the message that I got from that was like, yeah, train them. And so, if I may real quick just add
please.
that one of the things that I'm so proud of our department for is, there were people in my life during that time. One of them is our current chief right now. He would call me every couple of weeks. What are you doing to further your education? Don't drink alcohol, stay out of the bars, spend time with your wife, go to the gym, work out, study your case, stay engaged. This isn't going to define who you are in a long. This will be a speed bump at one point. It doesn't seem like that now, but you think about those. Look about those things now, and I'm so grateful that I had people like that. I had an old sergeant of mine. I know he wouldn't mind me mentioning him. And his name was Raul Ahumada, and that guy, was just a solid mentor, a confidant, somebody who called me and checked on me regularly. Would give you the shirt off his back and really truly cared. And when I came back to work, it was those people. There was another guy working in our detective bureau. I don't have his permission to mention his name. I didn't ask. I should have, because I did speak to him not too long ago. But, kind of helped direct me. It was like, you don't have to hold a grudge. None of these decisions define who you are. Let's go out and do good police work, and kind of kept me focused on a mission. Because I don't know how I made it. I can't tell you exactly how I was able to make it through all of that, because it is real. The depression is real. There were times I would sit in my car and bite my tongue, and I was so angry and so upset and so pissed off. It's some of the decisions. It's funny. It's been 12 years, 10 years, something like that. I can't remember. I get reminded of it every paycheck.
Yeah.
Because my paycheck comes and I see the $140-something that's getting deducted because of all the time I had to cash out to pay for my defense, because LDF at the time for us, we didn't cover off-duty appeals. So I paid $40,000 to get my job back. So I get reminded of it still to this day all the time, which, try to turn those things into positives. That when I see that, when I've got an officer who's this close to getting themselves in some serious trouble, my job as a lieutenant in our agency, one of the things that I try to be, and my partner does this very well too, is it's like, can we have that introduction? Take that hour out of your day, pull that person aside. What are you doing? You're going to get yourself in trouble. And I say that because the sergeant who gave me permission, and I have no ill feelings toward him, that's done and over with. He's long retired. Wish him nothing but the best. But the young 26-year-old former Marine, the kid who thought he knew everything, that was a year and a half on, that was arresting everybody that he could find that was breaking the law, really needed him to say, you should not do that. That's a terrible idea.
Having a look at
you know what I mean? And so I think, we go back to some of your previous, when we look at people in IA, do you have the courage to tell people that?
Yeah.
Do you have the courage to stand up and say, this isn't good? Or when you see a supervisor allowing something to go on that could result in some serious consequences, do you have the courage to say, stop it? No, we're done. Yeah. Let's squash this now. So
to that point, duty to intervene.
Right.
Duty to intercede, which is now a, you and I both know it's a Senate bill. It's a law, it's very, very important.
Yeah.
You know what, Chris, I will say this, the little that I got to know you, my thinking, I should say my belief is that faith has it that young 26-year-old that was waking up at 4 a.m. and doing everything you had to do at Camp Pendleton, and then going to your part-time academy and going through all that, it's almost as if you didn't have any adversity in your life to test your strength.
Right.
And believe it or not, all that to who you are today, because what you're talking about, what you're doing now in your current assignment is everything that we talk about today in the forefront is mental wellness.
Right.
And people don't get that discipline is forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? I tip my hat off to you. I applaud you for not only just sticking around, but going back to work with a good attitude, and dealing with adversity, which you and I can agree that has made you grow so much. And I'll leave it at that. And if there's anything you'd like to wrap up on this, any other lessons learned or takeaways for anyone who's listening, because I think it's very, very important that we understand what the process is like,
right?
What framing of allegations is like, and more than anything, how serious of this alleged misconduct is.
Right.
And anything else you can add on to that before we move on to the next segment?
I know there's some couple things that are requirements, legal requirements, things like that, SB2 and duty to intercede and all those things that come into play. But I would, if I could make any recommendations to anybody else doing my job, especially any command staff level chiefs of police that are out there, when you start hearing about some of these things, or maybe not quite to the level of chief, but if you're a leader, if you're a sergeant, if you're a lieutenant, if you're a captain, and these things are brought to your attention, there is something I learned a long time in the Marine Corps, and I've talked to chiefs about this, and they wholeheartedly agree with me. Handle it at the lowest level possible. A lot of these things become bigger than they have to be because nobody's willing to deal with it.
Or make a decision.
Right. It's like, well, we're going to have to ask this person. Once it gets to a certain level, the decision gets made. I mean, obviously, with the exception of some of the duties to intercede and, bias policing and, the things that are, we don't have a choice. These things need to be investigated, and they should be investigated. We don't need people like that are working out here. But, you got a guy that makes a couple mistakes, and instead of addressing it and having that leadership moment, and really, from what I'm hearing from conferences that I go to, the senior managers in our department are dying for those types of people. I need that lieutenant. When I do when one of the things that we do at our department, I think is fantastic, is my office used to do the reviews of all the pursuits and all of the uses of force, and we stopped doing that. The operations lieutenant, my partner, does them. She doesn't do IA. I do IA, right? So if she's got if it's a good pursuit, maybe there's a couple tweaks. I don't know if you've ever seen one. I've never seen a pursuit that doesn't have at least some minor policy violation here or there, right? And they're great teachable moments. That's how we teach people to do this job better and to be better at it. So we kind of have that separation. So it's not this stigma like we talked about before. It's like, oh, the IA lieutenant's reviewing it. I hope we're good. So to close up, to say that, and if you have those responsibilities, do your people a favor and do it quickly. If you got a pursuit review, don't go on vacation for 2 weeks and let that person go home every night wondering what's going to end up happening. Get it done. Yeah. And if you've got the power to pull the purse strings, pay the overtime to get somebody to get it done. It will pay you 2, 3, 4-fold in the morale and welfare of your agency to know that you care that much about them, that we're going to put this to bed. And cops expect to get disciplined. I expected to get disciplined.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Anyways.
We know the end result.
Right. Just get there.
Right, yeah. Time is of the essence. I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, man, look, talk to me. Mm-hmm. Worst incident in your career?
Oof, that's a tough one.
Something worst that just pops out.
There's a couple of them. Probably I guess the closest to getting killed for me was pretty bad. We had a shooting on the freeway.
It was your OIS.
It wasn't my OIS. I actually didn't fire a weapon. I just wasn't in a position to. But we had 4 or 5 people that did.
Okay.
And what made it so bad for me, and I'll make it quick, was LPR hit, felony wanted vehicle for assault on an LA County deputy or officer. Some LA County agency had a hit on the car for assaulting ADW 245 on an officer. I see it. I'm in a plane car, try to set up a takedown so he doesn't run because I figured it's going to go bad. And sure enough, it doesn't work out well and it goes bad. We get into a pursuit. We end up on the freeway. And he is actively shooting at us and trying to run us over. And I would have bet my paycheck that I watched him run over our canine handler. He came flying forward. The handler's on the other side of the car. He is going the wrong way on the freeway now at a stop because he had wrecked out. And he got his car going and comes back and rams him. And what I saw was him standing at the V of his door, in the driver's door. There's a freeway wall in his car and not enough room for a car to go through. And I see him start to run, and the car goes by and takes off his doors and keeps going, and I don't see him. Now, what ended up happening was, so in that moment, I actually put it out. It's on our radio traffic. He just hit our canine. I was confident. I knew his wife. I know his wife. I know his kids. I've been to the river with him. He was one of my detectives. I mean, I was 100% positive I just watched him get killed. I remember stepping out of my door thinking, I got to get there first because I don't want his partners to see it. Like, if I can get there first and keep them away, then at least they won't have to see it. Right. And I'm getting choked up now thinking about it because I was 100% positive I was going to go to. And in the meantime, there's shots being fired and all of that stuff slows down and it happens right there. And as I open my door, he pops up. He had tucked and rolled with his dog somehow and made it out of there. But the way my door was sitting, I couldn't see the bottom part of that. Yeah. And I was like, all of that. And then to be so elated. I mean, I remember just almost giving him a hug. I mean, we had some work to do, but I was so thrilled that he was alive, which actually kind of helped me manage that scene because all of a sudden, this wasn't that big of a deal. Wow. He's still alive. We're good. Let's go get this bad guy and call it a day. So that was pretty hectic.
No, totally. How about best achievement, best reward in your career?
Best reward I ever got was a plaque from my detectives when I left the Bureau. It wasn't from command staff, wasn't from the city. It was paid for by them. It was written by them at a bar, at a private gathering. And it's not something that I want to sit here and say, I started this, but it was something that was important to me as I was in detectives, is that I didn't think we really reward, because we don't, bigger agencies, you make it to detective and you kind of just keep going. You could be a homicide detective the rest of your career. Right. Well, for us, you rotate out. Well, what do we tell people when they've done 5 years of working in investigations and you go back to push a black and white? We should give them something. So we kind of started doing that, myself and Sergeant Miller at the time, later our chief. And so I wasn't expecting much. I wasn't expecting anything, to be honest with you. I just wanted to go have a beer with the guys and say, it's been a fun ride. I'm sad to go. I'm excited to, move into something else, but I'm going to miss it. And they got me a plaque that the words on that plaque came from the heart and very humbling. Stuff like the ability to lead without force. and to encourage others and to bring up the the morale and the welfare of our bureau, and to be a friend and a mentor, not only a leader. That tells me that I was doing something right. I may not always get it right, but those were the people that I aspired to be. Those are the leaders that I had, the people that made me feel that way. They're so important. And you can't tell me that even those in our job that maybe have the worst of intentions didn't have those, so
Totally.
Behave like that, right?
Yeah. And it's, believe it or not, sometimes it's hard to do.
Right.
Look, we're at the end, and I'm going to leave the floor up to you again, and anything you'd like to tell a young officer or someone who's applying to get into law enforcement, what would you tell them, man? What kind of advice do you have?
It's a fantastic career. I do think that it's one of the only occupancies out there. It's one of the only lifestyle choices of a job that you can make that I still do truly believe in, despite some of the struggles and stuff we've gone through. I am given hope, despite all the stuff that goes on, when I see academies getting full. When I see kids, I call them kids because I feel like I'm a lot older than them now, that are willing to take 2.7% at 57 with politicians, especially in this state, and officials a lot of the times that don't support them, that don't trust them, that don't want to give them any assistance or help, and are so quick to throw them under the bus, that they're willing at 21 and 22 years old to say, I think I can make a difference and I want to give this a shot. That's a courageous act right there, just to do that. So for those who are thinking about it, I was told when I started, it's a life in a fishbowl, and if you want to be liked, go be a firefighter. I wouldn't change a thing. I love what I do. My dad did it for 33 years. Wouldn't change anything. And if you've got the intestinal fortitude to step forward and to suck it up and to go out there and try to protect others who aren't able of protecting themselves, that's really what it's all about.
100% pleasure meeting you, man. I'm glad that we were able to connect. And I will tell you from a humbling feeling of mine that I would work for you any single
get
day.
Out of here. I'm going to come work for you.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much work I do besides this, but I can tell you that not many get to go through what you went through in your journey and persevere and keep going, man. You know what? So much success left. Let's keep in touch, and I thank you so much for showing up. We're going to wrap it up, and like always, just be safe out there, and don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.